We all have a unique message to share, and this guest is here to really hone in that topic. Rosemarie shares her experience in starting not one, not two, but three different podcasts over the course of her podcasting journey and the years that she sat on that idea. She's also a mentor to podcasters in getting them over those hurdles and those little things that trip them up to push past that and get their message out there. If there's one thing I learned from this podcast episode, it's that we have something to share. And it is so important that we get over ourselves, move past that, and get our message out there for the people who need to hear it. Please join me in welcoming Rosemarie to the podcast. Hello, Rosemarie. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. If you could start by telling everyone who you are, what you do, and a little bit about your podcasting journey.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity. And I'm a podcaster mainly because I'm retired and sort of a digital nomad. So I travel while I podcast. I'm the creator of 3 podcasts now. And because I enjoy the actual podcasting, I enjoy talking about topics. I enjoy interviewing guests, and I just love the process. I also love showing people how to do podcasts because it seems like a mystery to people who don't know the space. So I'm like, it's no big mystery, it's really exciting. And like, but what is it? So
I love that. So I'm brimming with questions now, but what do you find is the thing that tends to stop people from being like, I want to start a podcast? Or maybe they have like an idea, but they're like, I don't know if I want to do this.
So I just wrote an article about this the other day because it took me 6 years to start my first podcast. I understand a little bit about procrastination, but the article was the top 3 podcasting tools. The first one was mindset, because mindset is what tells you what to do when you allow it. Seth Godin, who says that the lizard brain, it stops you from publishing, stops you from doing what you know you're supposed to do. So I had lizard brain for 6 years, and the imposter syndrome is just a monster if you let it. So this is why I like to mentor podcasters or aspiring podcasters, because this is our biggest problem. It's not the microphone. We spend a lot of time agonizing over which microphone, how much does it cost? But that's not the real problem. The real problem is your mind is telling you, you can't do it. You don't have enough. You just not ready. So you focus on other things.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I see that so much. I actually had a call with a client recently where, life is happening and she's freaking out. She's like, I don't know if I needed to be doing this podcasting thing anymore. And I don't know what to do. And it's like, half the time I feel like my conversations with clients tend to be like almost therapy sessions.
Yes.
Let's get out of our way. Look at the facts, look at the data, go back to our goals. All right. Does this achieve our goal? Cool. Let's make sure we're focusing on this goal instead of the vanity metrics or these other goals that other people might have, or looking and seeing what this person's doing. And so much of it really is mindset and getting out of our own way. I've shared this story on the podcast before, but I remember when I first had the idea of starting a podcast, I had been listening to podcasts since 2016, started my first one in 2018. But that 2-year kind of window of me thinking, man, how cool would it be to have my own podcast? A lot of what stopped me was other people's opinions and them saying, like, your voice is like this, or this is like this, or, oh, you don't have the tech. But that was all fluff that was stopping me, when most of the time I will bulldoze through any of those oppositions and go for what I want. But it was really just me being like, who am I to do this thing?
Yes.
But I think, especially as women of color, it is so important for us to get our voices out there, to speak our truth,
Yes.
especially because there's no medium telling us, hey, you can't be here, right? So, like, we get to make our own space in podcasting. And so I love that so much.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is a battle. And it is bad enough if the resistance is coming from outside. But when it's coming from you, that's where the real struggle is.
Yeah, we gotta move on and get over ourselves with that. I remember hearing a friend of mine, she was talking about how, I was saying, oh, there's all these, white guys in the podcasting space, and they're telling these people to do things this way or this way. And I'm like, do it however you want. Like, this is how we're able to do it. This is what works for me. It might not work for you, and that's okay. But here are some options. And she was like, Alicia, there's people out there who need your voice. There are people out there who need to hear what you're saying, and you are doing them a disservice by holding back
Yes.
or playing small or being quiet. And it's like you have to get out of your own way and stop thinking about you and think about the person that needs to hear this message. So tell me a little bit about your 3 different podcasts.
Okay, so I go with the first one, which is called Solo Moms Talk. And I started that one finally in 2019 because I was a divorced mom raising 2 boys on my own. And for the longest while, I thought I was alone. So I joined a church discovery group and listened to the stories of other moms and realized you're not alone. It's not just you. And I'm saying, well, it would be nice to have a forum for single moms to just voice their truth and, whine and complain and whatever. It was like God said, well, why don't you do it? And I did do some research for 6 years and I started a online radio program and realized it wasn't the right forum. And I kind of like to tell a little bit of story if I have the time because I think it helps other people think through their story as well. And so the radio station wasn't the thing. So I discovered podcasts. I also discovered a guy named Pat Flynn who has a course called Power Up Podcasting. It's a really good course to go through, actually. And another guy called John Lee Dumas. He has Entrepreneur on Fire, really big podcast, which is a really nice guy, a community called Podcasters Paradise. And so discovering those guys helped me to gain some confidence in knowing that I could do this, but like I said, I really battled around with the mindset thing. And it wasn't until I went to a Tony Robbins event, Unleash the Power Within. And I came back, I came back home and did press publish. And so that's Solo Moms Talk. But then I discovered because I do all the editing, I interview the guests, all that, I do everything, right? And I discovered that I really enjoy the process. John Lee Dumas also paired me with a guy who was starting a podcast and we co-mentored each other. But really and truly, and he admits it, I was mentoring him because he hadn't started and I had started.
Mm.
So I'm like, I like this stuff. I know this stuff. So he asks a question and I'm helping him and I'm like, I know this stuff. And so I started Tools of the Podcast Trade while I also started a mentoring group. So Tools of the Podcast Trade is now a two-year-old podcast. Then this week I started what's called Abandoned Daughters of Caribbean Mom. It's a topic that's very dear to my heart because I'm Jamaican. But also I want to make a point that any topic that you can think of, you could do a podcast from it. I'm a blogger, I blog a lot, and I blog about a lot of topics. And I'm like, I could start a podcast instead of just blogging about it. And there is no competition in podcasting. And I say that because your unique perspective is what matters.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't delude ourselves in thinking, oh, we're going to get millions and millions of viewers and that's what we want, of listeners, and that's what we want, and that's what we're aiming for. aim for that message. Also encourage people to write a mission statement for their podcast. Who is it for? Why you're doing it? And what are you going to be talking about? And that mission statement will be your guide, especially when things get rough. So that's where I am with podcasting. Because I have another 3 that I want to do. So, yeah.
I know. I feel like every other week I'm telling my team, so would you hate me if I started a new podcast? And they're just like, oh my goodness, Alicia. No, we wouldn't hate you, but also you do not have space to do this and to live your life the way you want to. So you need to, like, what do you want out of this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I have so many ideas of things that I would love to podcast about, specifically more like hobby podcasts. But yeah, no, that's so cool. And I love that every single one of your podcasts is about bringing people in, right? And bringing them together in a way that unites us rather than, we see a lot of things. I feel like content lately has been very, what I hate about these things, or what is terrible, or like the worst thing that ever happened to me. And I'm just like, can we just talk about like nice stuff and fun stuff? Like, what brings us together? What unites us? What are those things? And so I love that every single one of your podcasts is very mission driven. I tend to tell people to do market research, but I think that that approach, while it works for myself and it works for some people, does miss the heart behind it, right? It's like, and I think that's just how my brain tends to work anyways. Like, what's the data telling us? What are the things that are working and what's not? Cool, let's take that
Yes.
approach and like get things done. A very, human design generator of me to just like go, go,
Yes.
go, go, go. But I do love that you bring that heart into it of like, what is your mission behind it? What is the impact that you want to make? And then tying that back, because like you said, you do, as podcasters, you will come across points where you're like, why am I doing this? This is
Yeah.
so much work.
Yeah.
I'm not getting the feedback I want, or I'm getting minimal feedback, or I'm not getting any
Yeah.
feedback, right? Like, you go through these moments. And I think that that's why not only having that mission statement is so important, but also having peers that you can collaborate with, that you can say, hey, I'm struggling with this. What do I need to do? So what does that
Yes.
community kind of look like, and that mentorship look like for you, and how you support people?
So the mentorship for me in the past, it was a group of people. We used to meet once a month. I've more gone to the one-on-one model because I think that when you people are in a group trying to find their way, they're a little more timid. And I often got off in these one-on-one conversation with them anyway. And I'm okay with the one-on-one because, I met a guy the other day and he was podcasting about jobs and user experience jobs. And he stopped podcasting in 2016. And I'm listening to the podcast and I'm saying, well, why did you stop this? And he said, I ran into some audio issues and, it was just too much. And I'm listening to this podcast and I'm thinking to myself, what a waste, because this is something that people wanted to hear. And just because he didn't have that one person to say, well, just record it again or run it through this software or that software, the audio can be fixed. You losing 8 years of your message, or your audience losing 8 years of your message, is hard to fix. So I like that one-on-one thing where you could just say, because sometimes it's just one simple thing. As Tony Robbins like to say, it's a 2 millimeter gap that will trip you up. And I like to help people overcome that one little thing that is stopping them from owning their genius, like I like to say.
What are some other examples? And obviously you don't have to name names, but like other things that tend to trip people up that you're seeing, especially right now.
So one of the things again is this obsession with the tools and the tech and the how. And I think that's one thing, but also, so, well, Joe Rogan is a millionaire and I made $100, so I'm not that successful. So it's just things, little things. It's never really a big thing. And so I'm finding that these little things are tripping people up. I had one lady for 3 years. She wanted to start a podcast, but she was obsessed with spreadsheets and slides and slide presentation. And I'm asking her, do you want to turn these slides into a podcast? She says, no, I just want to do the slides. So I'm like, when are you going to start the podcast? And she was just obsessed with this slide. Again, I think just the lizard brain taking over. And it's the number one problem is that we get stuck on these things that just prevent us from moving forward.
Yeah, it's not worth it. Honestly,
Nah.
like your message deserves to be out there. You deserve to be
Yes.
heard. And there are people out there who are looking for your message. And another thing that I find, and this is just me personally, lately that people have been arguing, to me is, oh, well, podcasting is oversaturated or it's starting to be oversaturated now. And I'm like, not really. If you think about all the people that are sitting on an idea or sitting on a backlog of episodes that they just haven't gotten around to editing. Like there's so much room for us. Only 13, I believe it is right now, percent of podcasts out there are actively producing content. And it's like an author saying, hey, I do not want to have you read anybody else's books. That is not how it works, right? Like as podcast
Right.
listeners, as book readers, we are reading and comprehending and pulling in information from so many different sources and so many different podcasts. I believe it was the avid podcast listener listens to about 9 podcasts per week. That is a variety, right? Like that is room for anyone to find themselves
Yes.
in those 9 slots, especially for the people who are like really enjoy podcasting. We're
Yes.
seeing that number of people interested in podcasting increase incrementally every single year. I mean, you've got the ads now that are saying, oh, there's a podcast for that. And it's like, but really, there is. You would not
Right.
believe the number of podcasts
Right.
that are out there. I remember in 2018, or maybe it was 19, I went to a podcasting event and I met a woman who has a podcast specific to Pez distributor, like collectors, like the Pez candy with the little head that bobbles back and forth,
Wow.
and that like you open it and the candy comes out. And I was like, wait, wait a minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
There
Yeah.
are
Like that.
there are people who are interested in collecting these, and you have a podcast about that. That is fascinating. Or even the podcast that's specific to cleaning your horse's hooves. Like, there are people who will listen to that podcast. And so it always baffles me when people are like, oh, nobody's going to listen to me. And it's like, you would be surprised at the
Yeah.
number of podcasts out there, and you just need to have your unique message tailored to it. And that's going to help you stand out.
Yes, yes, for sure. And I'm glad you bring up the number of podcasts that are actually active. We both belong to Podmatch, so we're well familiar with those statistics. But also there's an IAB report. I was trying to find it, but I couldn't put my finger on it, that talks about how popular podcasting is among listeners. So what happened is that I think during 2020, because of the pandemic and everything, lot of people started podcasts, but a lot of them pod faded. Like maybe we have 10% of the podcasters who started or still podcasting. But the thing is that people are getting more and more interested in listening to podcasts, and they're becoming more popular, and not just individuals listening, they're minorities listening, their target group, millennials, and that's where they go to for their information now. And also brands are also focusing on podcasts who have niche, who have certain niche. They're not necessarily going to the big guys. They're going to you because your focus is single moms or people with Pez bobbleheads or whatever it is. So there is so much opportunity in podcasting right now. It's just unbelievable for podcasters.
Yes. Oh, I could
Yeah.
not agree more. And I think that it's such an impactful thing too. Like, you've got the big name podcasts where they're like Casper mattress. Like I remember, 5 years ago, everybody was promoting Casper mattress. And
Yep.
sure, because you have a wider audience and everybody needs a bed. Like, okay,
Right.
that makes sense. But I remember we had a podcast client who has since pod faded, just because they transitioned into different careers. But their podcast was specific to women in tech who wanted to create their own web design business specific to WordPress. That is a niche. Like, that is a
Yes.
tiny, tiny percentage of people.
Yes.
And because their messaging was so honed in and so clear, and they knew who they were talking about, what their struggles were, they were able to sell out their programs and get those affiliates right in there saying,
Right.
I know my audience. But if you're trying to speak to everyone and be everything for everyone, one, we can't be tacos and
Mm-hmm.
margaritas. So that's not going to happen. Like, you need to be you. And you're not going to be for
Yes.
everyone, but like getting clear on that message, like you said at the beginning, getting clear on your mission. What is
Yes.
it that you want to accomplish? That is going to help you stand out and look really appealing to these businesses who are like, hey, you have a group of midlife women that we're trying to sell this specific product to. Yes, I want to talk to your audience. Yes, I would love to sponsor your podcast, because trying to reach them on social media now is a battleground, right? Like,
Yeah.
it is
Yes.
insane the number of things that we're seeing on social media, and like businesses are really struggling. But a
Yeah.
podcast where someone is your ideal client, your ideal listener, they're there, they're engaged, and they hear about your product, that is completely different than them scrolling for the dopamine hits on social media. So, yeah, I love podcasting so much. I
Yeah.
could literally talk about it forever.
Yeah, I also wanted to add, if you don't mind, I had this one guy in my mentorship group, and his podcast is in Swahili. He's in Africa, and his topic is tech, and wanted to know how he was supposed to make money from this. So I asked him if he lived in an area where there are stores, and are there any tech stores in his area. Go down the street, talk to a few of the store owners, and ask them if they would sponsor your podcast. 2 days later, he came back and said, I got a sponsor. I got some money. So that's the point for, your listeners. You can also get local sponsors on your podcast. And normally, nobody will ever ask, how many downloads do you have? Just talk about their business and you're good. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. They're looking for that visibility. They're looking to cut through the
Yeah.
noise. And like, what a grassroots way to go about it too. I love that so
Yeah.
much. To be able to like say, okay, this is very niche, but who is that audience? It goes back to like knowing who you're talking to, knowing what you're talking
Yes.
about, and being clear on that person. Because if you can communicate that with a potential
Mm-hmm.
sponsor, then they're like, yes, we have the
Yeah.
same audience, or yes, we have that same person in mind. And that's a perfect connection and collaboration. Even if it doesn't go further than that, they're going to keep you in mind for later in
Right.
their, maybe it's in the budget later or the next year. Then they're happy to collaborate with you. But getting that in the door, that's such a great way to do it. So
Yeah.
good. So I'm curious, because this is something that I discovered when I launched my second podcast, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. The difference in launching a podcast from your first podcast to now your third one. What were some of the personal differences, or even the differences, in the industry?
So the personal difference for me is when I started the first one, there was this long runway to launch, right? There's all this, and maybe people still do it. I just don't see the point in 10 weeks out, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing. I'm not one of those people. I'm sorry. And now it seems like people are just putting out podcasts like that. I mean, what I did, I had the idea for 2 years for this last podcast, but I talked to I was at a women's luncheon the other day, and I mentioned what I was trying to do. And they said, oh, you should go for it. You should totally go for it, because we know people who would really love to hear that. And I came home and I hit record, and I just recorded two episodes on my phone recording system, put it up, and got it published and put a post on LinkedIn. And I was like, okay, that's it. It's done. That's one of the main difference I noticed. As I said, in the professional world, there's probably still a long runway, of launch. But because I'm doing it for myself, by myself, I just figured just get it done, just get it out there instead of thinking about it for this long time.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I think I very similarly approached mine. I mean, we tend to do like 2-month launches with our clients just because they're doing their podcast is around their business. And so we want to be really
Yes.
strategic that their
Yes.
content matches it and isn't just hobby related. Which
Right.
there's nothing wrong with hobby podcasts at all, do you? But you don't want to spend thousands of dollars with my team to create a
Right.
hobby podcast, right? So how can we make sure that it's very strategic to bring people and your listeners into leads? So yeah, I definitely agree. I remember when I launched my first one, it did take me a few months to like get the idea, send people pitches to be guests, get those recorded, figure out the tech. There's all those like nuanced things. Whereas this one, the second one I did, I was like, you know what? This is the idea. Cool. All right. Hey team, we're launching this in 3 weeks. Here's the episodes. And they were just like, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally agree with that. What do you think about the industry and how the industry's changed in the years since you started your first one?
So there was a shift to where it looks like the corporates and the celebrities and all those big wigs were taking over the industry. And then I guess they realized it wasn't radio or TV. So a lot of them pulled back. So I was actually talking to Alex about this the other day that podcasting is for people like us. The same way the internet normalized access for everyone, podcasting is now normalizing media to the little guy. So you can get your message out. You no longer have to compete with ABC or CNN or whatever, right? So that's what I notice is that there's just a big difference in access and who can be who in this podcasting space.
I agree. I'm thinking even back to when I started listening in 2016 and thinking about the podcasts that I listened to then. The first podcast I discovered was Stuff You Should Know, which like that's a pretty high level organized podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But the second one was Tiffany Hahn's Raise Your Hand and Say Yes. And that was small person, indie podcaster out in California, new mom to twins, like talking through her business journey. And it like expanded my mind of like, wait, I don't have to work just my 9 to 5. I could have a side hustle too. What is this? I don't have to listen to the same 3 songs on the radio. I could be learning things as I'm driving.
Yeah.
What? I remember my mind being blown by this idea that I could listen to someone who I would never have come in contact with or discovered teaching me something. And I just, I love podcasting. And I agree. I think it is for us, right? And by us. And it is us getting our message out there to connect in a really intimate way, because voice is such an intimate way to express how we're feeling, what we're doing. Whereas, social media tends to be more glittered version of that. Whereas you can feel and hear the emotion in our voices when we talk about the things that we're passionate about.
Right.
So good. Thank you so much, J. Rosemarie. This has been absolutely incredible. Please tell everyone how they can connect with you, get to know you, join your membership if they're interested in getting, more access to you and support from you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And so I like people listening to my podcast, if you don't mind. Solo Moms Talk, and there's Tools of the Podcast Trade. Those two are more general, I would say. Abandoned Daughters of Caribbean Moms is more specific. So if you're not one of those demographics, then that won't apply to you. I have a main website at jrosemarie.com, and I'm on social, all of the platform as J Rosemarie. So that's JROSEMARIE. And you can always, email, text me. I have my WhatsApp on there as well for people to get in touch with me.
Yes. Oh, that's awesome. And we'll make sure for anyone who's driving, cleaning, doing other things that we have all of those links in the show notes as well as the blog post for anyone who needs to go back to those. Again, thank you, J. Rosemarie. I really appreciate you being here today and sharing your journey. It has been so incredible.
Thank you. And if I have permission to say one more thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. If you're out there and you're thinking about a podcast, please don't sit on your light. Please don't hide that light under a bushel. Please let that light shine because there's somebody stumbling around in the darkness waiting.
Yes, I could not agree more.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.